Hi, welcome to another episode of the Visual Storytelling Today podcast. The show is designed for you, the marketer or entrepreneur, who may be looking for more effective ways to connect better with audiences through the exciting world of visual storytelling. We will introduce you to inspiring experts from diverse industries that bring fresh perspectives on how to capture attention, build trust, emotional empathy, and last but not least, drive business results. Enjoy the show.
Hi, I'm Shlomi Ron. I'm the CEO of the Visual Storytelling Institute based here in sunny Miami, Florida. And I'm really excited to have you over to another episode of the Visual Storytelling Today podcast. Today, I have a very exciting topic to share with you. You know, we all talk about visual storytelling and how do you need to adapt it to different markets and regions. So to explore this fantastic area, I invited Jacqueline El-Baghdadi. She's the regional marketing director at Al Shaya Group based in Dubai. She has over 20 years of experience really helping global consumer companies like P&G increase their market share by bringing to life their brands in various regional markets. So welcome to the show, Jacqueline.
Hi, Shlomi. Very nice to be with you.
Excellent. Yeah. So before we dive deeper, maybe we can start with the beginning. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your journey, your backstory, how you got started, or if you recall that magic moment that made you decide, yes, I'm going to pursue a career in marketing.
Oh my God, it was pure coincidence. So until you said a spark moment, I was going to just tell you when I started to work, but in reality, let me go one step back as well. So basically, I studied for 3 years in my university computer science before I decided to move into marketing, and I failed miserably because I'm a very extrovert. I like to be with people. I like to speak. And I figured out that me and tech and only me and the programming was not the most amazing fit. So I changed to broadcasting in the very last year. And in the very last year, actually, I took a challenge on myself that I still need to graduate in 4 years. So I need to do the full major in 1 year, do loads and figure it out. And I honestly didn't know back then whether I want to be in marketing, I want to be in broadcasting. I knew I wanted to be in somewhere where I communicate and speak with people because this is my edge and this is what I like to do. And then halfway through the broadcasting journey, one of my doctors told me that it would be very hard for you to be a broadcaster because you have a nasal problem that makes your sound pitch extremely.
Interesting.
And accordingly, I said, okay, done. I won't be able to be on TV. Then what is the next best thing? And it was the time of consumer goods and FMCGs, and really smart people are the only ones who get taken. So the way P&G recruits in Egypt is basically creme de la creme, like the best people, the top of their class are the ones who get in. And you still need to do an exam like a zillion interviews.
Right.
And I went for it. So it was a bit of a challenge at the beginning. And then I got there at the beginning, not as a marketeer, but as an external relations manager. I did a lot of PR, influencer marketing, and everything that has to do with marketing and brand building, but not necessarily directly brand building.
I see.
And then 9 years down the road, I was like, I want to move to brand building. I want to move to marketing 100% because I genuinely believe that the brands can do a lot to the consumers in the region. And despite that we're a global brand, there is always a story that can make sense to one consumer in those regions. Despite that, what we're saying might be universal, but it's a matter of how to relate. And it has been a journey since then. So basically, it's an amazing journey. I love being with consumers. That's my biggest passion. So this is, I think, the moment, because whenever I used to go to consumer research, this is the moment that makes me feel like I want to be in brand building, because what she's saying, I can translate it into a story from the brand that makes her feel this brand speaks
This
to me.
aha moment. Interesting. Wow, that's incredible. Wow. And to think that you came from a computer science roots, that's kind of interesting.
Failed miserably.
Yeah.
But, I still tell the story.
Yeah. I really like what you said about the brand building and, how you can bring to life brands using storytelling. So that kind of brings me to my next question. It's a question I ask all my guests is how do you define visual storytelling?
So for me, storytelling is a very big concept. Everybody honestly define it in his own way, and it's a very big global concept. For me, on a brand building level, storytelling is when a brand can marry the brand story to a consumer story that makes sense. As simple as that. So if I can marry my brand story, because every brand has an equity and has a specific story, a mission, and a purpose that the brand is after. But whenever we can marry this story to a story that the consumer believe is her or his story, and when you see it visually in an ad, content, or social media content, they would feel that's my story. I think this is when it's brilliant.
That's fantastic the way you describe it, because that's how I communicate also to my clients. It's creating this magic moment where your brand story becomes your customer personal story. When they can see themselves mirrored in that story, wow, you got them. So it's brilliant what you just said. And so you obviously worked for P&G for over 10 years, and maybe you can give us a sense of what is the end-to-end process looks like when you're translating a global visual storytelling strategy for P&G or Alshaya into local markets. How does it look like? What are the steps that you're going through?
I think today, what I learned in P&G, and honestly, I genuinely cherish a lot, is the first thing they tell you as a marketer in P&G is that consumer is boss.
Yeah.
And if you just take this into action, it's the recipe to everything. So we are global brands. And even in my new role, which I recently joined, so won't be able to give you a lot of examples, maybe in the next episode.
Yeah.
Shaya is a franchisee of global brands. And the global brands will not look in every market and think I will develop a product specifically for this consumers, or else they will go bankrupt.
Yep.
However, it's about really consistently continue to say consumer is boss. That's the product that is coming from the globe. That's the brand equity. How can this equity and this product fit a consumer need in Egypt, in Saudi? What do they want? Because all the global brands have very good quality brands.
Yep.
They perform the job, they do what they need to do, and they are really global leaders. So I don't have a question on the brand performance, but I want to see from this brand that does 10 million things, what is the one thing I want to highlight as a story to a Saudi consumer versus what is it that I want to highlight for an Egyptian consumer?
Yep.
Because both their needs are not the same.
I see. So you're going through some, what I would think, geolocalization, where you need to translate, as you said, a global brand equity to a local region. So are you doing what is your research looks like? Is it a focus group, interviews?
So we do a mix of several things. One, there are consistently the database or the foundation, which is the brand health tracking. And this is very important. Without a brand health tracking, a brand is basically shooting in the dark. And it tells you the vibes. It tells you how consumers are perceiving you today. Where do you stand versus your equities and attributes that you want to be? And basically, it helps you pose the right business questions that you then take to focus groups and qualitatives. But I wouldn't go into qualitative shooting in the dark. Right. I need to analyze first, how is my brand being perceived? Is it close to consumer, far and distant? Is it young or old age? Is it hip and cool? So this is the first step Then based on what we see as an opportunity or where we're not connecting right with the consumers, this is where we go and we say, okay, we want to sit with consumers and understand more. What is it that they want? Which brand do they perceive, for example, young?
Yeah.
What do those brands do to them that we're not doing today?
Mm-hmm.
Why do they perceive them young? What young means to her? And accordingly, I can take that and do an action plan on how to visually give her the story in a young format. And I just took young as an example because most of the global brands have some of those young issues, because the very old brands that have a huge heritage or great legacies, but then they always have those deep dives when they start to become old brand, my mother's brand.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. I think some of the research work is so essential to understanding what I call these subjective meanings that consumer hold in relation to brands, and only once you interview them and can extract, how they describe the problem, how they, address the product, then you can really maybe even use their language of describing these experiences in your visual stories. So it's actually going to ring true when they're going to be seeing it, distributed. So that's really exciting. What type of challenges you are really coming across when you doing your brand adaptation process or geolocalization?
I think the biggest challenge, or in the low income markets, whenever you have a challenge of the customers are very basic versus what you're giving them as a brand, and you need to bring it really closer to them. The second one is whenever the value is a question mark. Right. So for example, when devaluation hit in Egypt, I was working on a brand on Always, which is a market leader. Yeah. And the growth has been all behind growing the market and growing the category. So growing the pie. It's not about growing share versus competition. It's a great brand. It's a love mark. Every consumer I sit with tell me, I know it's a great brand. I would love to use it, but I can't afford it.
Yeah.
And this is an issue where from a brand building standpoint and storytelling, it's not anymore about the brand. I need to figure out how can I make it still relevant to her, despite that she's telling me I can't afford. And during devaluation, it was one of the toughest ones. Actually, toughest recent ones, because at the beginning, on this brand specifically as well, one of the toughest ones were actually how to make it relevant to the consumers in the first place in rural Africa and in Egypt and in Pakistan, where people are not using pads in the first place and they don't believe there is a value. So I think, but in the recent times, the biggest is because this has nothing to do with the global proposition. I didn't have to adapt something. Honestly, we had to create a story specifically for consumers in Egypt during devaluation that makes sense to them.
Yeah. And I would imagine you do this by focusing, as you said, on the customer. The customer is the hero of the story. It's not about you as the brand. The brand is just a facilitator or a guide through this journey. Yeah. So
I can share with you actually an example on that one. So that's a very dear one to my heart, because actually it won 2 Effie's awards.
Oh wow.
So let me give you actually the context. So the context on this one, so basically exactly 5 years ago, the Egyptian pound devaluated on a course of 6 months by 50%, resulting into major inflation, affordability drop. And on our Always specifically category or femcare category, the problem is we had to really strike the balance between we need to price to be able to actually at least break even, but at the same time, consumers are not in reality able to afford the brand. We had to make a solution. I'll give you the context actually.
Egypt's inflation rate is at its highest level in 30 years.
Well, Egypt is suffering.
People who could once afford to shop at malls now look for bargains at secondhand stores.
As the local currency dropped by 48%, the confidence of our target audience dropped by 100. Meet Yasmin. She, along with 25% of our target, couldn't afford always anymore. Switching back to cloth was her only option, an uncomfortable behavior we had spent years trying to save her from. Too shy to voice out her discomfort in view of her family's cash squeeze, she felt stuck between a bloody cloth and a tight budget. At a time when she had to give up everything, we did not want to give up on her. So how could we get a girl who couldn't add up all the sacrifices she was making to get back to her comfort zone? Simple.
So we say it's simple when we were applying for the FEs, but it's not really simple. So we had to do several things. One, we took over and launched a lower proposition, actually stripped away the products one of the products we had from all the luxuries. Mm-hmm. And it was driven from a consumer who told us, I buy whatever makes me feel smart. I don't have money. Right. If you're putting for me flowers, I don't flowers. So we didn't compromise at all on the performance, but we removed the things that kind of make her, we discovered that she kind of feel annoyed. The brands don't feel for her. She believes that you need to understand me. You need to feel for me. I need with 50% less of my affordability, still feed my kids, educate them, and buy my household. So I need brands who will feel for me and will give me something that will make me feel smart. So the first thing is that we launched a new product, but that was not enough. The second one is we figured out there were a lot of consumers were going into something very, very, very actually interesting. The way to save money, they were buying the smaller packs because she doesn't have the cash at hand to buy bigger one. However, by buying the smaller pack, she was paying by pack a lot more versus buying a bigger pack, which we have always on promotion.
Right.
And the way to do that is that we decided to do the math for her. So our story was her story, and I'll share with you the story, but it was all about how to save.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
So,
by showing her that saving only 1 guinea a day, an amount within her reach, will help her save her comfort and confidence.
قلقانة لحد يشوف اشتري راحتي ازاي اصل القماشة مشكلة في دروسي مش مركزة اشتري راحتي ازاي مع اولويز جامبو وفري وفي بيتك راحتك اشتري بجنيه واحد في اليوم تشتري راحتك طول اليوم اول جنيه من ماما كان خمسة يا ترى فيه تاني يا ترى والتاني كان مفاجأة صغيرة بجنيه واحد في اليوم راحتي في بيتي وخروجتي طول اليوم اللي أيامك أحلى.
Wow.
So Shlomi, that's exactly her story. So this is what she told us. It's not us inventing it. I can't take credit for that. But when we sat with consumers, they're the one who told us their stories. She's the one who told us that when I go back to using cloth, when I have visitors, I'm very worried when my mom tells me to go and get the drinks because I don't know if I stained already or not.
Right.
She's the one who told us if you were going to have a communication that needs to convince my mom because my mom is the one who buys for me the pant. She needs to know that I can't study because she doesn't care about my embarrassment. My mom cares about my education. And accordingly, the scene and the visual where you see her not able to study.
I see.
And basically, it's the same product. It's the same brand. It's the same of what we stand for, which is really be happy, always achieve more, go forward. But it's a go forward story, which we had for 10 years consistently. in a very different way that fits with the context and where she is today.
Wow. No, I think this is fantastic because I really like the way you describe it, specifically that this story came into the foreground after basically hearing it from many consumers in your research. And the fact that you were able to extract that emotion of being left out, like the brand doesn't really count me in. And then there's also the logical side of, what I'm using as a replacement is much more expensive than the always alternative. So I think you kind of played on both the emotional brain, the fact that, hey, you left me out, you didn't consider me in the mix. And at the same time, there's also the logical thing, that it also cost effective, much more affordable if you switch. So I think you got those two foundations right from your consumers. And this is a great evidence that a thorough research is a fantastic way to create meaningful stories, because you're not inventing them, out of in your marketing department brainstorming. It's actually coming from customers.
And this is the biggest success driver. Yep. Because when you then test, when we test, we always test big ads. And then when you retest the ads with consumers and you hear her saying, oh my God, this is exactly my story.
Yeah.
Or this is the story of my cousin. Do you know my cousin? This happened to her. Yeah. And then in a focus group, you start to have this energy of each one sharing her story because she believes that this represents her. Yeah. You know that you're off to something really big, because
definitely
this is what will break through the clutter. Because honestly, today we're all consumers at the end, and we see a huge clutter of stories. You see ads all the time on your YouTube, on your Netflix, on your on every screen you're using, and you will stop and watch the one that makes sense to you and relates to you.
Right.
It's no longer that we're sitting in front of the TV waiting for the stories to come, and anyways, we're going to all watch them all. It's not the case anymore.
Yeah. And then also what I liked about the example you just showed, and I wonder if you could take this into account when you create them, that it doesn't feel like an ad. And that's really how I define great visual storytelling. It doesn't feel like an ad. It feels like actually a short film or an artsy kind of content that people would choose to tune in, and because it's actually talking about real stories from real people. Do you find that you actually take this into account, this artistic approach?
Yeah, we moved out of brand voice to consumer voice, honestly, on this brand 8 years ago.
Got it.
Or 10 years ago, actually. I just discovered that I grew older 2 years. But 10 years ago, we moved from talking brand, a la the very old-fashioned ads of this is the story, this is how the brand will come and solve it, and then close by the brand voice saying what the brand does. A consumer story and a consumer realization journey where the advertising walk through in the shoes of the consumer. And we figured out that comes with a lot of emotions, and usually the recall becomes very high.
Absolutely. Yeah, no. So you're pretty much following like the classic story, 3-act story structure, which is like the setting, conflict, resolution. You're kind of changing the different parts. But it's coming from the customer perspective. The brand is just really kind of I call it like the magical object that helps solve the problem. Yeah. Very cool. And one thing that I'm always curious about, obviously you came from a large global company like P&G. Just in terms of the terminology, you kind of briefly touched on it earlier. If we're thinking about the brand architecture, major brands always have their own brand architecture. So if I use this example, I wonder if this is how you address it as well. So let's say, you have a global brand family narrative around Tide. So there's one narrative statement, what Tide is all about. Then you have regional product narrative about, let's say, Tide Black Abaya, and that's really customized to that region. And then you go down to a local brand narrative adapted to each market. Let's say you take the Black Abaya and adapt it to Egypt versus Saudi Arabia. And then what you do in each market, you go one level down, which is really supporting local visual stories like the one you just showed, that really specifically telling a story from that market. Am I right in this brand architecture or hierarchy?
Yeah. So the equity doesn't change. So the brand architecture or the brand equity pyramid, if we would call it, this is how we called it in P&G, doesn't change from a country to the other. It's the sticky assets or the communication assets that makes difference. And you will find, for example, Tide Black Abaya is the Tide Black in the US, called Black Abaya in the GCC, because the black is really the abaya that the females wear.
Right.
So just taking this technology that is global, calling it, we can easily call it black, right? Everybody has black.
Yeah.
But calling it and making it about the abaya just makes me as a consumer feel they understood me. They know I have abaya. This one is developed only for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I do it in Egypt, I wouldn't do it about abaya. I wouldn't even launch abaya. By the way, the Tide abaya does not exist in Egypt.
I see.
Because the abaya is not the national costume.
I see.
But you would find, for example, we hero so much the white in Egypt versus in the GCC countries, we hero the black. Why? Because in Egypt, we discovered years ago that the women in rural areas hanging their clothes, the white clothes, among their neighbors is her moment of pride.
Oh, yeah.
The one with the whitest and brightest colors is the one that that is the best mom, the best housewife.
Right.
So this is a pride moment to her. So you will find a lot of heroing about the whites in a country like Egypt. At the end of the day, any company has the black and the white and the colors. It's a matter of which one of those all global offerings would you offer this consumer? And it really comes from really knowing the consumers, because if you don't spend time with them, how would you?
Exactly. Yeah. No, it sounds like you need to wear the anthropologist hat in a way to kind of figure out, the cultural differences and the different meanings they assign to your brand. And as you said, kind of customize it. So I'm guessing, for any marketer watching or listening to this, how do you track success metrics? What success looks like for you in a campaign?
So there are honestly in-process measures and the end in mind. The end in mind is really depending on what the campaign is for. Is it an equity and emotional campaign? Is it a campaign that drives a specific product? Then it's the sales and the pickup on this specific product. Or is it a brand building campaign where my KPIs would be really the brand health, the brand equity, the top of mind awareness, and the recall of the ad. And we measure all of that. The other thing, but this, we measure it and we get to know it 3-4 months down the road after a campaign is launched. The one thing that we do as well, and we are trying, at least in P&G, we were trying to be faster in that and more pragmatic, is that we test ads. We do place ads with consumers before we spend millions on them on the media and test their story. So we test the story as if you're testing a movie. Basically, you check with the consumers, how well did they get the story, did they comprehend it, what's
brand recall,
the recall, the purchase intent post seeing this ad. Honestly, most of the players now and the marketeers are trying to be, though, a bit more pragmatic in this, so that you're faster to market, because we create a lot of content now on digital that doesn't take years. It expires very fast on digital.
Exactly.
In the old time when it was only about offline, you would put an ad for 6-7 months. Now an ad on digital would expire in a month maximum if somebody's very lucky and have a great story. So all marketeers were trying to look into how can we test it digitally in a fast forward 24-hour test that gets you those results, but in a very agile tools that are digital, that are panels, ready-made panels that give you the same sense check, but without really having the long, lengthy process.
Got it. Now, in terms of the tactics of reaching the consumer, you mentioned paid media with ads. Do you do anything on the content marketing side, things that are more around maybe user-generated content where consumers actually creating the content around specific hashtag, or another approach that I see with major brands, they create brand documentary films about a theme or that they really believe in, like think of Patagonia films, they believe in the environment, so they have that. Do you do anything of that nature?
Not in P&G, honestly. It was an open space for us that we wanted to look at for so long, but we were still traditional. Very soon for Shaya brands, it's a big priority. We're riding the bus of transformation, partnering with different digital partners like TikTok, Facebook, Snapchat, all of those to really do creative workshops and see how can we play in this area. I think on retail brand and fashion brands and in this industry, it's very important to be ahead of the game on that. Specifically influencers and consumer generated content, because it's being generated already. Whether the brand is part of it or not, there is a lot of content being generated by consumers. So I think this is an area that I'm investigating a lot with digital partners now. Haven't seen it happening on P&G level.
I see.
But very soon. So next time we talk, I'll update you where we are.
I'd love to, And one thing, since you probably... in your previous role and in this one, you are managing more than one region. Do you find sometimes that campaigns that you run in one region actually are benefiting another region in terms of maybe a line of thinking or execution-wise? Do you see any kind of relationship between the regions?
Look, line of thinking, yes. How to bring it to life executionally? No, and it needs to be adapted. The adaptation changes from, so for example, a storyline in Saudi would be extremely different than a storyline for UAE, for example. Consumers are completely different. Saudi is mostly locals, less expats, with a very big pride of how the Saudi journey of modernization is now. And we need to really be up to date. In UAE, more than 90% are expat communities. I can't take the same cast and the same storyline here and put it here. I could leverage the same shoot. I can share the same brand story, but then I need to be very clear that the storyline is different. That this same cast will need to look different. That this I can do a lot of leverage, honestly.
On the workflow side.
On a workflow side, on the back end. Then what comes to the consumer needs to be drastically looking different. And the story needs to speak her story. I can't go and speak to a combo of expats that what actually combine them together is that they have so much ambition and so much aspiration in life, and they want to achieve more, and that's why they're leaving their countries and going to a different country to live there and achieve more progression in life. In the same way, I would speak to a local who just got a lot of liberties and new freedoms and are opening up and feel very proud about being the first female to work, the first female to drive, the first female generation to be entrepreneurs. I can't talk to them the same thing.
No, you're absolutely right. You got to really leverage. I just remembered, the time I worked for Nokia, and we were thinking about how to leverage lesson from one market that was considered strong to a weaker one. And there were some, ideas around that. But you're right, it has to do with the workflows more than the actual output. The output needs to be customized. And we're kind of reaching the end of our segment. But one question I always like to end with is, what would you say are your top 3 tips for marketers that looking to adapt their visual storytelling strategy to a particular region or several regions?
I think one is consumer is boss. I would continue to cherish this one because this is the driver for me. And I think possibilities before limitation, because we're all, whoever a marketeer who's leading a region, you always have those limitations of, yeah, but I don't have budget to do 7 different adapts or 7 different copies. Let's think possibilities first, because if you know the consumer, you crack the story, you crack what it could possibly look like, and the revenue and the side that you can get out of being relevant. Then on the back end, efficiencies can be still done, even though that you're very local. So I think there are 3 things. Consumers, know the consumer first, what needs to be true. Think of no limitation first. Then when funds and budget becomes a limitation, there is a lot of scale that can happen on a back end level that the consumer doesn't see. The consumer will not know that I shot the ads for Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, and Egypt in the same shoot, in the same location, in the same set. They wouldn't know that. With different casts, with different stories. That's an efficiency that as marketeer, we need to figure it out with our agencies. But it can happen. But I think the first 2 are the most important, and then efficiency is the way to convince people to do the first 2.
Awesome. No, I really love the way you describe it. Know your truth, your customer truth, and then really, don't limit yourself, open up your imagination, and then kind of frame it within your budget, where the efficiency, as you said, you can scale it to multiple regions with the same workflow. So this is brilliant. So Jacqueline, thank you so much for your time today. I mean, I learned so much, and I'm sure my viewers and, also my listeners are super excited about the amazing work you're doing in the Middle East, in the Dubai area, working on a variety of regions, bringing to life brands with your visual storytelling strategy. So if people are really interested to learn more, how they can contact you?
I'm on LinkedIn, so that's the biggest social media platform from professionals. So they would find me easily and very much accessible. Excellent.
Wonderful. All right. So thank you again for a great conversation today. And for all of you, we'll see you in our next episode of the Visual Storytelling Today podcast. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Visual Storytelling Today is recorded in Miami, Florida. The show is published exclusively by Visual Storytelling Institute. Learn more at visualstorytell.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on the iTunes Store. Until next time, don't let your big story wait to be told.